welcome to another edition of ISG Smart Talks, the podcast where we discuss the different ways that technology influences and impacts businesses and how technology changes the way that we interact with people and how we lead teams and how we lead companies. Our objective, as always, is to inform, to inspire, and also to entertain. So hopefully all of those three in equal measure. I'm sure that we will do that today because I'm joined by Lois Coatney, who is partner and president at ISG. I will, in a second, ask Lois to introduce herself. But Lois and I will be discussing how to lead and manage teams in the world of platforms and ecosystems and the way that leadership and governance is changing in this digital world. But first, Lois, welcome to the podcast. Delighted to have you with us today.
Thanks, Barry. It's great to be here.
And could you introduce yourself to our listeners and explain a little bit about what you do at ISG?
Sure. So I come from Minnesota, which I must say is the great tundra right now. It's February and we got lots of feet of snow. But I really started in as a supplier back in the 90s of technology and worked for a company who, unfortunately, I'm sad to say, is no longer with us with EDS. So many people, I think, in IT know very well about EDS, and that's where I started out. But I joined ISG about 8 or so years ago. And with the goal of, my role has always been around the relationship between and our enterprise clients and a supplier like EDS or HP, et cetera. And when you have very large technology providers providing, a lot of complex services in an ever-changing environment, that requires, a great deal of trust, of process, of the ability for, those two very large enterprises to work well together. And so that's something that I've been doing at ISG. And now to the point where I lead our GovernX practice, which is a technology, a platform that really enables enterprise clients and suppliers to work together effectively to make sure that the IT needs that enterprise client has, that the supplier can do that in the most effective way. So that's GovernX and the platform, and I'm excited to be here to talk about it.
Excellent. No, thank you very much. It's interesting. So some of our listeners would probably not be too familiar with what the role of a sourcing advisor and what we do. And those that may be familiar with the world of sourcing advisory may also think that the majority of what we do as advisors in this market is the pre-contract work, is to introduce clients to the right service providers to meet their needs, to help them to select through those different suppliers, to select the right one, and then to help them to get a contract in place. But actually, a lot of what we do is post-contract and ensuring that the supplier-client relationship is a successful and a sustainable one and delivers a positive outcome. So a lot of what you do is in that post-contract world, right? In that whole relationship management, ensuring that the two parties can work incredibly, successfully together by providing them with the right tools and techniques and approaches, etc. Is that right?
It is. And, there's a lot of attention, you're right, put into finding those right partners. But what we have found is if you don't pay attention to that relationship, it's kind of like, if you think about even in our own personal lives, like whether they be marriages, whether they be relationships with your family, when you have a long-term relationship, you got to invest some energy into it. And the same thing is in business. These relationships you hope will last. Often contracts, although they're reducing in the length of term, but you have that relationship for at least 3 years, maybe 5, and you hope to continue to extend that relationship. It's very costly when you have these providers who are, working in your environment to give you the tools, to give you the innovation that you desperately need for your business to be successful. And if you're constantly changing those relationships, that's very disruptive to your business. And so once you get that contract in place and you have that relationship established and they're starting to deliver those capabilities, you really need to foster that so that you can maintain that value. You make sure that, what you really need them to do, they continue to do. You have the ability to evolve that relationship because as we know, the technologies and the capabilities are changing very rapidly. And you need the true sense of a partner and many partners within your environment to help you to be successful. And so, that is fostered by, trust. It's fostered by visibility of who's doing what and proactively seeing where there might be some issues and being able to address it in a true partnership way. And so that's what we do. Our goal is really to ensure both that client and that provider both are bringing their best and being able to work really well together. And so that's really where we spend our time.
Brilliant. Thank you. I know when I first got involved in this industry 20 odd years ago now, there used to be a frightening statistic banded around about the success rate of an outsourcing partnership, that 20% of outsourcing deals failed completely, and that something like, I think it was 60% or something, failed to meet their objectives. And there was only a very small percentage that were actually really successful, long-lasting, enduring partnerships. And I remember being really, really shocked by that, and got involved in the industry as partly to try and help to resolve that and to make relationships more successful. Because when outsourcing, as it was called then, and it still is to a certain extent, but certainly everything was around outsourcing. Then when a relationship is done properly, it could be really transformational, and you get the 1 + 1 = 3. But yeah, when done badly, it takes up so much time and effort and distraction, and erodes trust, and organizations not supposedly working together but not trusting each other and not providing each other with the right levels of transparency and data, and almost then trying to act as a blocker to make the relationship fail. So it's such an important area of the sourcing world of partnerships to make successful. So and I think I'm right in saying that the level of or the percentage of deals which are unsuccessful has shrunk, and the percentage of deals that are successful has increased. I think that's correct. Certainly, my observation of what I see in the UK.
Yeah, and I would say that that's fairly consistent across the globe. I mean, I actually did a little bit of a world tour here at the beginning of the year, and just came back from Australia and talked to many clients out there as well. And what I would say used to be the issues of trust and feeling like they're not able to achieve, or that the supplier's not listening. I mean, that seemed to be, I would say, if you peel back a number of years, just for both that supplier and that client at the many levels that they need to operate, whether it be at the executive down to the day-to-day operations, there just was this strong sense of, I'm not sure we're really, working together. We're talking at each other, but we're not really working together. And that, what that client is trying to achieve, it didn't feel like they had, that supplier with them going hand in hand. But it seems to evolve. I think that a lot of those fundamentals are in place. And I think it's because of the energy that people have put into it. When so many organizations now have a vendor management organization, or procurement has taken a view of, it's not just about getting a contract signed and, making sure that they're controlling the cost. It really is about understanding the need to work with that supplier on a regular basis, have good communication, has, governance forums in place, make sure that there's an effective way to escalate issues, that they have good visibility of performance, of compliance, many of those foundational components are in place. I think now the challenge is the number of suppliers and the complexity or the diversity of the capabilities that are coming in and being provided by suppliers in a client's organization. That is now increasing. So it's stressing it a little bit. It's forcing a client to really understand and recognize what are the different kinds of capabilities each of those suppliers are bringing, whether it be technology orientated, people orientated, services orientated, and just recognizing how they best work with each one of them in the right way. And so I think that's really where we've graduated to. So it's still something to put a lot of energy and attention on. It's just, increasing, I guess, the complexity of how you grapple with that broad supply base. That seems to be the challenge today.
Yeah, and I think as we move into more of a digital world, you could argue that, we're already there and there is no such thing as digital business. Every business is a digital business because they rely so heavily on digital technology. But we're certainly seeing a world where the amount of spend on what you might previously have called outsourcing, but technology relationships with software or services providers is increasing, year upon year. But the size of deals are getting smaller and shorter in duration. You're seeing quite a fragmented marketplace where there's an increased amount of competition from different suppliers of different shapes and sizes. So that, arguably client organizations have much more choice and flexibility, and they want that flexibility in shorter contracts and smaller contracts because something new will come along incredibly quickly. So, understanding the different suppliers in the market and what they can achieve and how much they cost and how you would change from one to other becomes increasingly important, because just as in the consumer world, digital enables us as consumers to be much more selective about who we work with. I often say that convenience trumps loyalty now in a digital world. If I want to change my bank because I've had a bad experience, I could do that immediately, and I might have banked at the same bank for the last however many years, but I don't really care because what I'm interested in is functionality and convenience. And almost you could now say the same in an enterprise environment. Just because you've worked with the same supplier of infrastructure services for a number of years doesn't mean you're going to continue to if there's something which gives you much more convenience and more functionality. So understanding what you've got out there and how you're managing it and being able to move from one to the other in a relatively seamless way becomes increasingly important, right?
Absolutely. And then actually you've seen the rise of a capability. It's called contract lifecycle management, really to address what you're talking about, because you're right, the cyclical nature of being able to find, onboard, select, put a contract in place, onboard them, manage that, and be able to, fairly rapidly get through that process is very important. I would say many of the clients that we have today, when I talk to them, and they're either a combination of procurement and or that vendor management accountability that I spoke about, they say speed and agility is the most important thing that their business has of them, because as you said, there's always new innovative capabilities that the business wants to take advantage of, maybe just to test it out, right? They may not know if that's really what they want to do, but they need to be able to test out new things, trial it, and then make some decisions very rapidly. And so the ability to be able to bring those suppliers on board, one, flesh them out, and I guess this is also a world because of, the amount of risk that some of those suppliers can bring to their environment, whether it be around security or data. You need to vet them very quickly. You need to understand what sort of risk that they might bring to the environment. So it's not just a matter of, yes, that supplier has a great idea, let me bring that in. You also need to, have a layer of making sure that it's not, bringing some risk in. So getting through that process quickly, getting the right agreement in place with them, the right contract in place with them, and then being able to onboard them quickly into the environment, and then subsequently offboard them also safely and quickly as you might need to be in case they have IDs, in case they've had access to your environment. How do you make sure you kind of untangle them from your environment very rapidly? So that whole process is becoming really important for any business to be able to go through that process quickly, and also being able to have visibility of all of those relationships. I would say that the majority of our clients have well over 1,000 contracts just in IT alone. They have well over 1,000 contracts that they're managing, and they need to have visibility on that. They need to understand the spend that they have. They need to ensure that they've got the right compliance measures in place with all of those suppliers. And of course, the turnover of those suppliers is fairly rapid. So it really is something that has required, procurement and those supplier managers to have some sort of capability themselves, some sort of platform in place to be able to facilitate that process very rapidly.
Yeah, you can absolutely see what a complex world it is. If you think 1,000 contracts just in technology, then you need to understand the risks associated with all of them, the deliverables and obligations associated with all of them, not to mention the commercial, the models and the invoicing forensics that you would need to do to make sure you're paying what you actually agreed to pay in the contract. But the worrying thing is that many organizations that we see, large organizations, and I won't name any names, don't have a system in place to manage that. They're still managing it through spreadsheets. They still got contracts in paper on their shelves in filing cabinets, and they'll pull them out now and again when things go wrong. So having a team and a way of working and a platform that I know that you run to manage all of that in a seamless way to give visibility in real time to decision makers becomes so incredibly important when you're looking at businesses running supplier relationships at that sort of scale.
Yeah, it is actually shocking. I mean, these are big companies, right, who we all use, and when we start working with them, I mean, as simple challenges that they have is, when I'm asked the question, how much am I spending on, cloud capabilities, or how much am I spending on certain kind of apps? It takes them days to figure it out because it sits all in spreadsheets, and you hope that you have it all in your spreadsheet. And it is really, sometimes we think it like, how could it get to that point? But yet I don't know if it crept up on people or it just, because the environment is moving so fast, that the need for bringing in those new capabilities is just moving so fast. I think it caught people a bit off guard because, if you look back, like you said, 10 years ago, you still had pretty much very large monolithic or just, 2, 3, 4 providers in an IT organization who kind of did it all, right? You had a little bit of diversification, but that was about it. Over the last 10 years, it rapidly went to, really driving and bringing in all these new, bespoke kind of capabilities. And I think the back office of those companies just wasn't quite ready for it. And now they find themselves in, that kind of an environment where it's hard to just get your arms around it. And then to add more, stress around that is now you've got regulations coming in to say, you're accountable to make sure that any provider you have in your space, they're complying with this, or they're, making sure that they're following all the right procedures due to the risk. And so we have some very large companies that they're sending us, in Dropbox, all of their contracts and their clauses and their, all the obligations, and they want us to sort through it, number one, and help them understand not only what their spend is, but also where they have gaps and where they have, concerns or risks, where they have a supplier who doesn't have the right, mechanisms in place, or is not reporting or providing the assurances that they're complying with data privacy, et cetera. And so there's this rapid need by many clients out there, but by many companies who just need to get their arms around this, who need to get the visibility that they need, so that they can not only get control of their current environment, but tee it up to, be able to sustain the rapid pace of change that they see happening in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And from a leadership perspective, who do you see taking responsibility for this ecosystem of providers that we're now seeing in most global organizations? It might typically have been the responsibility of the chief procurement officer in partnership with the CIO, or do you see is it now moving to more vendor management models and having a vendor management office, or are there is there a blueprint for successfully managing a digital ecosystem from a governance perspective?
I think it's evolving. I would say traditionally procurement, clearly had the fiduciary accountability around getting POs out, right? So there's a firm commitment between themselves and the provider, and they delivered services and they were paid for what they delivered as a procurement function, which often sat and still sits in finance. I don't know, it depends on the organization, but that's usually a much more of a financial view on that. But because of the complexity of the types of arrangements and the need, as we talked about, to manage those services ongoing, that's where vendor management really popped up, predominantly in the IT and the business process spaces, because there were ongoing services with clear deliverables, obligations, performance standards that needed to be managed, and the relationships needed to be managed on an ongoing basis. So often vendor management organizations within those business units typically started to spring up to manage that. But more recently, because of GDPR, because of the regulatory obligations in the U.S., even we're starting to see, again, coming back from Australia, they have a number of regulations coming in their banking and financial industry, and even in Modern Slavery Act, which is also, we've got some of those same obligations springing up in Europe. The board is becoming much more active in this because they really, unfortunately, you can look to the news to see where there's been some pretty serious reputational impact where, a supplier has, found a way to get into their systems. We were just hearing it on the news this morning as I was driving in about another company where there is, a data breach. And, these are big issues that has now risen to the board level. And so compliance and security now also is very involved in what is happening in the supply space. And so it's almost this interesting quandary, because if you think about it at a board level, who is accountable? Like who within their organization has the accountability? Because you have the business who's saying we need to go faster, we need to bring in new innovation, let's quickly speed through this process to onboard new capabilities. But then you got finance who's saying, well, wait a minute, do we have the right controls in place? And compliance certainly is wait, you got to go through my checklist, and I need to, fully vet these suppliers before they can come into the environment. And it's this whole swirl of accountability that it's almost like everybody's accountable to some way, shape, or form. They talk about in the risk space, you've got first line of defense, second line of defense, which are there for a reason, because you need to have really good practices and a rigor built in at the delivery level. When you're working with suppliers on a day in, day out basis, you need to make sure you have the right procedures in place. You need to get the evidence from the suppliers that they're doing the right things as they work within your environment. But then you also need to have an oversight. You need to do assessments on a regular basis. You need to validate that, what they said they were going to do, and they're taking the appropriate safeguards within that company. And you also need to monitor, right? You need to see what's happening across your suppliers in the market, and to make sure that you can kind of proactively position yourself in case there's something happening with one of your providers that is key to your environment, and kind of prepare yourself for what might be an impact. All of that really there's a role for many different organizations in ensuring your environment that really does report up to the board today. So it's really taken on a very different kind of risen up to that level because of the importance it has on that company's success.
Yeah, absolutely. It used to be we used to live in a world where IT was a function of the business which was sort of hidden away in the back office to enable you to have systems to get things done in the front office, and then you could see how governance and leadership worked, what a CIO's role was. But now, as technology is now a business function, it enables business. It's the way of doing business. You've now got this blurring of boundaries, and technology is the business, and so the leadership role, the CIO's role, if you like, in this analogy, becomes one of understanding the business strategy, understanding the technology strategy to deliver the business, understanding risk and compliance, understanding the people aspects, trialing new technology and making sure it works, and balancing risk and opportunity, because now that technology is the business, in every business function, they want to use new technology to achieve efficiencies and to make improvements. But, how do you as a CIO manage that flexibility and enabling them to trial new things? That might be AI related or robots or whatever the new functionality they want to trial with, what you've traditionally had of centralized security and compliance and making sure that you're not exposing the organization to undue risk. It's a really complex task now. And I do wonder whether the old models that we had in place with CIO and CTO and CPO are outdated now, and whether new organizations, if you were starting a global organization from scratch based on technology, whether you try something completely different. What do you think?
I do, and I think it's interesting, and when even when I think about the folks that I work with often in our client organizations, it is really the business who's driving it, and when they think about what they're trying to achieve, they are looking at what their competitors are doing, what different capabilities they can use, whether it's in understanding data, right? Whether it's in, like, as you said, bringing in AI from a customer experience perspective. There's so many fantastic opportunities to really, leap your business forward into whatever that is doing, whether it's service related or product related. But I think when you think about, even if it's a doctor in a hospital, right? Someone who's trained to be able to, care for their patients, they're even thinking about technologies, right? No matter what discipline you have trained for, you've spent your career in, now it's an opportunity to think about how you would bring new technologies and new capabilities into your environment. And when you do that, though, you do need to work with procurement, work with compliance, work with security, work with IT, and not only you can't make those choices in a vacuum, nor can you just have your IT person, right? You can't have them just make that choice for you. You almost need to make a collective choice to understand, if we bring in this capability, what sort of impact is it going to have within our ecosystem, as you talked about? And what are the things that it needs to do from a functionality, from a business perspective, what is it that we're really trying to achieve? But what are the ramifications of having that sort of capability with their environment so that we can put the right framework in place or put the right requirements and obligations in place so that we can bring that in safely and we can make sure that we're gaining what we need out of it versus bringing that additional risk in. But it's a combination, right? It's a combination of those departments, if you will, coming together very early on in that phase of understanding how they're going to achieve that objective. And so it's those titles and those what largely used to be discrete organizations can no longer live in a discrete, structure anymore. You really need to figure out how the expertise around how to bring in suppliers, how to secure that environment, how to ensure delivery along with where the business needs to go. That really is an ecosystem of joint collaboration, not only in the initial decision making, but also in the management of that ongoing. So it really does, bring some new models, I think, to bear.
And I think it's only going to become more complex because as we rely on technology more and more, as we do every day, and we will continue to, we'll be putting more responsibility in the hands of machines and not just with people. And that might be a good thing, but it might be a bad thing. We already see swathes of robots, or RPA robots as opposed to just physical robots, but physical robots in some organizations as well, taking more and more responsibility for decision makings. They've been programmed, of course, but as in artificial intelligence comes more to the fore, they'll start to be able to think as well. And then at the same time, we're using AI and technology as you've described with GovernX and the way we manage technology providers to manage those robots and those artificial intelligent algorithms themselves. You have the clever technology, the AI managing the AI, if you like. So governing that as a human is going to become increasingly complex. So I'm not sure where organizational structures and governance will get to ultimately, but we will definitely have more humans being augmented by machines. I often use the term of using technology as an exoskeleton, so we'll be augmented by machines to help us to manage the machines. And I think it throws everything up in the air. You'll see the right way to lead and govern organizations in the future.
Well, and that's why, we've created a platform because I think data, to me, what strings it all together is visibility of as much information as you can get of what's happening across your space. And that's, when we developed our tool, we looked at who are the users, who needs information about what's happening in your environment across your supply chain. And so what we did was first, who are the users? Who are the users of information, or who's actively involved in making decisions, both to select suppliers as well as manage them throughout the process. And so, we looked at what does procurement need, what does finance need, what does the business sponsor need, what does compliance need, and it all comes down to access to information and picking up that information throughout that life cycle, like I talked about the contract life cycle. Also triangulating that with what's happening in the market, because there's always new capabilities popping up, and there's also, because you have those 1,000 contracts out there and all those relationships, there's an evolution of those partners constantly happening, right, through acquisitions, through unfortunately some of those providers unable to sustain their capabilities. You need access to information throughout your environment and what's happening in the market, and using AI to bring that together so that you are alerted, that you can very quickly see what are the areas that I need to address. You can't actively manage every single relationship, every single contract the same way, but you do need to be able to put a lens on top of it making sure that all of your contracts, all of your relationships, all of the day-to-day delivery data is being brought into one place so that you can then analyze what's taking place and be able to properly address and grapple with whatever is popping up out of that. So,
Yeah.
so even though, it's a bit scary, like you said, as to the complexity and the awesome responsibility that each of those leaders have within their organization, by virtue of being able to utilize those same tools to be able to harvest that information and make that available, that is also taking place. So you can be on top of it, and you can make sure that you're making the right decisions. And so, I guess that's the great satisfaction I get out of it as well. Even though there's a lot of challenges out there are solutions out there, and we're speeding along that path, utilizing technology as well to be able to make sure that we can continue to help those enterprises take advantage of the great opportunities that they have out there with suppliers.
They evolve. Yes, no, absolutely right. Somebody very wise once said you can't manage what you can't measure, right? And so we're helping them to measure what they've got to enable them to manage it. Now let me turn tack now and ask you the 5 questions that I always ask my guests.
Sure.
So the first one is, which technology has had the biggest influence on your career to date, and why?
So I mentioned I grew up in really in an IT organization and an IT supplier, and I very rapidly, even though I started off in finance, I very rapidly became, again, looking at how suppliers and clients worked effectively together. And although lots of technologies popped up, I have to say, workflow is the fundamental of, I think, any service management capability out there. And so, I've worked with a lot of suppliers around service management, whether they be ServiceNow especially. I was part of HP where we had our own. But when I think about the fundamentals of being able to do work, which requires a really good workflow system, one like ServiceNow, that to me has been kind of a strong advocate, or has been really I've been most working with, and it's just business is about collaboration and about being able to do work with a variety of people who all have a hand in it. And so, to me, that has been one of those strong evolutions or innovations around getting a good service management capability in place. So that's really
that's a great answer. That's not one that's a great answer. It's not one we've had before, not one I would have guessed, but actually it makes an awful lot of sense. Without good workflow, it's difficult to have a very streamlined or efficient process. It makes a lot of sense. So, good. Second question, which technology has, in your experience, promised the most but delivered the least? Or has there been a technology that's turned into a bit of a damp squib in your experience?
Well, again, it's probably where I have the most experience and where I've been working with a lot of our clients. A lot of the ERP systems, I think, were vague. Like, I remember when SAP came out and it was, everybody was going to be an SAP implementer. And SAP has had a great track history, just like any of the other ERP systems that are out there. But it's interesting where when I talk with the variety of clients that I work with today, I hear a lot of complaints that, yes, we've got all these, enterprise systems in place, but they're not quite doing what I need it to do. And I think there's a huge evolution out there that, you need some basic capabilities in place around ERP systems, but at the same time, there's a great set of microservices or capabilities that can be brought into an environment. And to me, I think the answer moving forward is, don't assume one big system is going to do it all for you.
Yeah.
What you need to take a look at is, I think, taking a plethora of individual capabilities that is the right answer for you and figure out how to tie it together. And
Yeah.
I think that to me is an evolution. I'm seeing a lot more clients do that in their environment. Just like we talked about, there's a lot of service providers out there who are providing a lot of great technologies. And to me, the secret is, how do you take those new innovative ways of utilizing data, of being able to process information, and figure out how it can all work together in an ecosystem versus having one big system. And I think it's just I think a big shift out there, right? And
Yeah, I
so I
totally
wouldn't
agree.
say that it's failed, but I think there's quite a evolution happening out there as to the types of systems they're bringing in.
Yeah, no, I agree. I described it to some people the other day as being a conductor of your digital orchestra. You've got to get to play your digital symphony. You've got to get all of the different bits of your orchestra all playing in a harmonious way. And
Yeah.
one size doesn't fit all. So yeah, no, I would agree. Um, the third question is around: is there? I'm a bit of a gadget freak. I've always got the latest gadget, or even though most of them gather dust in my man cave at home. But is there a gadget that you use like every day that has changed your life or that you're excited about?
Now, this is one we have in common, I know, because we just were together, a few weeks ago, and we were both using the same gadget, which is the remarkable tablet. I love that thing. Now, I'm not usually a gadget girl. That's just not my thing. But I tell you, I love. Maybe this is a generational issue. I love to write. To me,
Yeah,
when I can write, it just, my brain can function. It brings clarity to what, I think all of our days are, right, of so many
yeah,
different things that are happening. And if I can actually write out my thoughts, draw some pictures, it helps me put context to all the things that I need to think about. And I love these new writing tablets that are coming out, like the remarkable one that I have. It
yeah,
just it is really great. And I don't know. I noticed you had one. I see a few more people
yeah.
having them. So I don't know if it's a trend or we're just part of a generation or what it is.
It's funny,
So I
isn't it?
do
Because
really
it's
love it.
quite. It's. I totally agree. It's a brilliant gadget, and I'm using one as we speak. And I use pictures quite a lot, and so I love the fact I can just draw a picture on it, and then I can send it to somebody as I've written it on my pad. And I love the fact it doesn't do much more. Okay, my
Yep.
penultimate question: which technology do you believe will have the most disruptive influence on business over the next decade, if there is one? I don't mean if there is a
I
decade. There will be a decade, but is there is there a
yeah.
technology?
I to me it's still, this is probably a common answer, but I think just the way AI is shaping. I mean, in every facet that we work, whether it's in business, in our personal lives, that there's something happening in the background where there's a bunch of AI that is helping to, bring an answer, to look at all sorts of data, behavioral data, whatever that is, and provide an answer. I mean, we use it in our business. It's being used in so many facets. There's so much data out there, right? There's so much information, and the ability to a person can't do it, right? You need that broader technology ability to look at that quickly and come up with answers and help drive and provide insights for someone to make a decision. That to me is just so key. And so, I'm excited every time my technical team, they're always looking at they're always surveying what's the latest AI tool out there and how we could bring that into bear. And I think it's just really exciting what we can see technology do today in that space. So anyway.
Yeah, I agree. No, I think the world of AI has only just begun, and we're going to see massive developments in that space over the next decade. I totally agree. So my final question, um, is there somebody who's had a big influence on your career to date from a technology perspective? I often call them a technology a hero. Has there been somebody in a leadership position who's had a real influence on your career?
So I have a feeling this is probably going to be a unique one you've not heard. And I don't know if you know of Ralph Shagenda, who used to be the CIO of GM, but
Yes.
when I was starting off, I mentioned I started off with EDS back in the early 90s, and I worked at the GM account. And at that time, he was making some revolutionary changes, right? If you think about way back in outsourcing, we had these big monolithic outsourcing deals, and I used to be part of, the big one, like 15 billion or whatever it was. But then he made this dramatic move of bringing many suppliers in. He's like, wait a minute, why don't we just have EDS? Let's bring in many providers. And that was, I think, very, he was start of that vision. He had the vision to
Aggressive,
say, yeah, there's a lot of providers out there. Look at all the new things that are happening. Now, of course, now it's 100-fold. But it's just that thought. And the reason it affected my career is because it forced us to think about, as a service provider, it forced us to think about how do we interrelate with a bunch of other new technologies or other providers in one environment. And that set my career. From that point forward, I spent all my time really grappling through that of how you bring multiple, actors, if you will, in an environment together so they can work cohesively for a particular business. So that was actually inspirational to me. I didn't spend a lot of time with Ralph individually, but just his vision and where he saw it going and kind of forcing a very large, complex organization to really work in that way. That kind of set the tone for my career, and I'm still doing that. So
I was going to say you're absolutely doing that now and running a big team, helping organizations to do that around the world. So great answer. So thank you very much, Lois. I really enjoyed our conversation. I think we've covered lots of different aspects of how technology is disrupting business and how you can manage the digital ecosystems that we see helping to support the clients that we work with. So really interesting discussion. Thank you very much indeed. Really appreciate your time.
Great. Thanks, Barry. Thanks for the time. I appreciate it.